everyone, and welcome back to the Word Alive broadcast. I'm your host, Dr. Mike Dobbs, and thank you so much for watching today and taking time in your busy schedule to do this. And of course, if you can't watch, we do want to remind you that we now have the Word Alive broadcast audio edition, and so you can listen. If you want to get your headphones or earbuds and listen to the broadcast, you can do that while you're doing something else. And so you can just kind of incorporate us into your day in some way. And we're very thankful for whatever you do. And we appreciate, again, all of our sponsors that sponsor us on a monthly basis through Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting the Word Alive broadcast. And we're going back to Genesis, and we're in the 11th chapter. And we're studying, of course, the generations of mankind, as we have already studied in the 10th chapter. And then, of course, we talked about Babylon. And then we were talking in our last broadcast about Shem. So he's one of the third sons of Noah, and of course all of mankind, and which is only one race, that's the race of mankind, came from three sons, the three sons of Noah. And Shem, of course, is what we call the Semitic tribes. And of course, Israel today is part of the Semitic tribes. And when we study this, we're going to see that God first talks about the world as all of mankind. Then he disperses them because they unite themselves against God. And then he talks about the Japhetic nations from Japheth, which was the elder son of Noah. Then we have Ham, which was the youngest son of Noah. And Shem, the middle son, is the one that God now begins to focus on, because from Shem, he will bring Heber, and then the Hebrews, and then Abraham, and then Isaac and Jacob will bring forth Israel, the children of Israel, because his name will be called Israel. So as we look at this, we see God beginning to focus down to his plan from all of mankind to the center of what he is doing on the earth through Israel to bring forth Messiah. And Messiah will save the world from what Adam and Eve did in the garden. And so that's the plan of God in a nutshell. What he's trying to do is bring salvation to mankind and bring us back to a place of relationship like we had when Adam walked and lived in the garden. And so it's just a return back to what God originally designed, his original order. Everything is a return back to the original order from its corruption, from the involvement of mankind and Satan that thwarted the plan of God and tried to change the plan of God. But the plan of God cannot be altered, and it will return back to his original order. Thank God. And so we're studying that, and we were talking about Shem. And in verse number 10, the Bible says, "And these are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood." So when Shem came out of the ark and they would begin to establish a new world, 2 years after he came out of the ark, he had a son by the name of Arphaxad, or as some people say, Arphaxad. And we want to look and see where we're going to find him, because he is the beginning of the generations of Shem. And so Arphaxad, when we read this in the 10th verse, it's the beginning of the new world, and this is the first son that is born into the new world. And that is why I believe the Bible records it as number one, because it is the son of Shem, which will be the beginning of all of the people that will come from Shem, that will be considered the sainted or the godly or the people of God, that will come all the way down to the time of Israel. And of course, none of them are perfect, and none of them, when we say people of God, they're only people of God because God chose them, not because they're perfect or different or better than anybody else. It's simply because they are the people of God. But let's look at this. The name Shem, of course, means the name or renown, or to make a name for yourself. And in fact, even to this day, a lot of Hebrews will call, or Jews will call, the Lord Hashem, which means the name. And so Arphaxad means one who heals. And you could understand why God would move upon Shem to name his son the one who heals, because they believed that through Arphaxad, which was the birth of a new child in the new world, that the Lord would heal the world, that he would bring it back to its beauty and its glory and its luster. You've got to imagine that 2 years after the flood, that things still probably looked pretty rough. I mean, when you think about storms coming through and you see the debris laying around for a long time until you can finally get around to cleaning it up, and if you don't get around to cleaning it up, it's going to be there for a while. And so there was probably still debris from this worldwide flood. There were still things that were reminders of the destruction that had taken place. And so, they're walking around in this world. They're trying to start all over again. They're trying to build their houses and to plant fields. And in those first 2 years, there's a lot of transition going on, a lot of restoring going on. And so, this little boy is born, and he says, well, I'm just going to speak in faith that this is going to be the generation, or this is going to be the son who is he's going to witness and be a part of the healing of the world as it comes back to the beautiful glory and grandeur that it once had. And so, they're looking at a world that's been altered and changed, and they just believe that in the generation of our Faxad, that there would be a healing that would take place. And so perhaps maybe that is why he named him the one who heals. Let's look at this a little bit, and I'm in the way a little bit here, but I'll slide over as I can. But the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat. I'm looking up the larger chart here, if you wonder what I'm looking up at. But the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, which is on the border of Armenia and Turkey. And the Armenians call it the Mountain of Doom, or the Mountain of Judgment, because they believe that is the ark that Noah built that is on top of that mountain, and how it's did something like that large of a structure be found on top of a mountain. So obviously that is Noah's ark, and that proves the Bible is true. And what I found in some research here is pretty cool is that Noah is actually mentioned in the ancient writings of China. China is one of the first that's going to begin to record history, record genealogy, record their documents and such as that. They are going to be the writers of the world before anybody else is, really. And they call him Fohi or Yao, and of course that's Noah. And it's kind of funny when I'm sitting here saying this, because there is a Noah's Ark that is on Mawan Island that is located right off of the beautiful city of Hong Kong, on a little island that is separate from Hong Kong. And I was privileged to be with my brother-in-law, Dr. David Hamilton, who delivered some tabernacle furniture to these people, and they were installing it. We were fixing a little bit of the shipping damage that had taken place, and we were there for the dedication of Noah's Ark on Mawan Island. It was just really a neat thing. And while we were there, we saw the dedication, and they had a Noah, and they had Noah's wife and Noah's sons and their wives. And of course, they're all Oriental, they're all Chinese. And so when I was looking at this earlier in the week, I thought, Yao or Noah, at least when I was in Hong Kong, was Oriental, and he was called Fohi or Yao. And so there is actually history in the history of China about a flood, and about a Noah, and about an ark, and about the people coming together and making fun of Noah, and about the animals coming into the ark and being saved, and about a new world. And so when you look at that, you understand that Shem settled Asia, and he has Arphaxad. And we would probably say that it would, if it's 2 years after the flood, then it would be somewhere in the 2500 BC area that he would have been born. And then, of course, he has Shala. Shala has Eber. Eber is where we get the word Hebrew, and it means the people from across the river. And so the locals called them the Hebrews because they came from across the Euphrates River from as we understand. And then, of course, Peleg, and Ru, and Serug, and Nahor, and Terah. And Terah actually is the father of Abraham. So you can see how the genealogy of Shem is going down, focusing down like a laser, if you please, down to Abraham himself. Then, of course, So according to what we understand, Noah would have moved into the area that we call China today, and he would have begun the civilization of China in the Qin dynasty and such as that by the name of Yao, who was the founder of the first Chinese in that area. And then Shem would have settled in Asia, and Japheth, the oldest brother, settled in Europe, and he had the sons of Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan or Yavan, and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras. And when you see this, you can see the influence of these cities because I'm going to move over a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about here. And let me see which way to move. Okay, how about this? All right. So now you can see what I'm talking about here. Gomer, of course, is the father of the Gimmerans. Magog is the father of the people that we probably would call Turkish today. And then in Russia also, the Roxolani, which would be Russia. Madai is the Medes, and Javan or Yavan is Greece, which is a very ancient people. And then Tubal and Tiras would have founded the city of Tyre, which is going to be near Sidon there near Syria. And then Meshech, of course, would have settled the area in Russia that we call Moscow. So you can see the Japhethic nation settled most of Europe and northern Europe, and that's where they would have settled and become a part of and established. And then Ham, and now let me see if I'll move over here. All right. So Ham, of course, settles in Africa and in some of the other parts of the world as well. And he has Cush and Put and Canaan and Mitzrayim, which of course is Egypt, and then Nimrod. And then Nimrod has Chaldea, which is Ur, and he has Ashur, which is the father of the Assyrians. And of course, he establishes the kingdom of Babylonia. So you can see the thing that's happening here is that you've got all of them starting to scatter as they did in the 11th chapter. They scattered abroad and they established these areas. But no genealogy is going to really be followed with Japheth and Ham or even Noah from that point on, because what we're going to focus on is the genealogy of Shem and all the way down to Terah as well. So from Shelah to Eber, and Eber has a son by the name of Joktan. And Joktan has several sons: Almadad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, Yerah, Hadaram, Uzal, Dikla, Obal, Abimiel, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. These are the sons of Joktan, who are the sons of Eber. Now, what is the significance here? Well, when you look at Palestine and the surrounding areas, you're going to see a lot of these names because these men moved into those areas, established villages that became cities, and some of them became kingdoms because of their might and their power and their authority. And then Peleg, of course, where we talk about Peleg and Ru and Serug and Nahor and Terah. And then Terah has a son by the name of Nahor, which he named after his father, Abraham, which is really Abram beginning, and Haran. And Haran was the youngest brother. The other line that we see is Uz, Hul, Gether, and Meshech. And of course, these are going to be the sons that are going to settle northern Europe and Europe itself. So Haran dies early. Lot is left an orphan. Abraham takes Lot as a son, and Abraham is now who we're going to focus on as we begin to study all these things that we're going to read in the Bible. And of course, Abraham has Isaac, but he also has Ishmael, which is his elder son, which we'll talk about later. Ishmael, of course, has Ishbak and Zimran, and Haran only has Lot, but he is raised by Abraham. You know, and when you start studying this, it really starts making the word come alive. And that's what we're here for, right? To make the word come alive. And when you see this, you begin to kind of put families together. And now it's not just names that you can't pronounce, but now it's people. It's people that were parts of families, that established areas, that built cities, that worked hard to rebuild the world from its previous destruction. And then the focus on Terah, and then Abraham, and Abraham, of course, becomes the focus of the scripture as it brings forth Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob brings forth the children of Israel, as we've said before. So let me just give you a little bit of idea of where they settled. When you look at this, of course, now they are going to continue to migrate into other areas of the world, but this would be the recording of probably the first migration. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but you can, when you start, if you reference back to the 10th chapter of Genesis, like I did earlier in our teaching, and you can go back and see those studies, you'll see where most of these settled. Of course, now the green is the descendants of Japheth, the oldest brother, and you can see that he settled in Gomer and Magog and Tiras, which is Tyre, Riphath, Meshed, Ashkenaz. There's a city called Ashkenaz. It's actually on the coastal area of Israel, and was occupied by the Philistines, which of course we know they came from Caphtorim. They were called the Caphtorim and the Kashlehim, and they were really Cretians from the very beginning, from the Isle of Crete. And I've been to the Isle of Crete, and actually I've seen similarities between the names there, which could very well be the same people, because that's who they were. And then, of course, the purple is Ham, and Ham settles most of Africa, as you can see, the Jebusites, Amorites, Girgasites, Hivites, Archites, all of the ites that we call the Canaanites, that lived in the land of Canaan, but God drove them out of the land because he had promised it to Abraham, because Abraham was his faithful, and Abraham was the son of Shem. And of course, he declared that Ham's descendants would always serve Shem and Japheth's descendants because of the curse. And then, of course, you'll see the red is Shem's descendants starting in Elam, and you can see Arphaxad, actually, where they settled in Mash. And a lot of these names, when you're reading the Old Testament, you're going to see these names. You're going to see the battles that were fought, and the wars that were fought between these kingdoms that were really, some of them were just brothers. If they weren't brothers, they were cousins. And this is what we call the Fertile Crescent, because this is where all of mankind first developed. And of course, like I said, then they will start scattering abroad from one place to the other. Now, let me give you a little bit of reference here to time. And one of my favorite resources that I'm going to share with you, and this is actually from my book, The Word Defined, Research Study Bible, but one of the things that I'll share with you is that according to Usher, which he's a tremendous historian, he gives these dates. Now, I'm sure there will be people that will argue with these dates, but I really feel like Usher, who actually wrote his book in the 1600s, and it's probably one of my favorite books, beside the Bible. Now, of course, the Bible is my favorite book, but it's probably one of my favorite books, and I love the anthropology, or the study of mankind, or the study of history that he will do. And he puts the flood around 2285, which means Arphaxad would have been born in 2283. And that would be Genesis of the 11th chapter. And by the combination of history and archaeology and genealogy, one can establish that God created Adam approximately in the year 3941 BC, and that the flood occurred around 2285, as we've already said. And so these dates are according to Usher. Usher was not only was he an astronomer, now he wasn't an astrologer, he was an astronomer. He studied the heavenly bodies, and he understood how everything was fixed, and he couldn't really explain that, but he understood how everything was in a fixed orbit, and so he believed that you could just back time up, and by doing so you could back dates up. And he even claimed, and I didn't record it here, but he even claimed that he could pinpoint the day that Abraham was born, the year and the day. And so that's pretty intense. And he's a legitimate scholar that a lot of people put a lot of confidence in, and I certainly do, because I believe that he did some amazing research in the 1600s that is still very imperative and relative today. And so Arphaxad would have been born in 2283, which means now we have a starting point. And we know when the others are born, because it says, and when Arphaxad was a certain age, he begat Selah. So now we can literally start timing up, and we can determine what year was what year. If we can find one certain pinpoint that we're sure of, then we can pretty well start setting dates, and that is what Usher did. And the only way that he could be in error is if he just got Arphaxad's date wrong. And then, of course, if he did that, then he would have a problem. But he starts with the flood, and then he adds 2 years. And, of course, that's when Arphaxad would have been born. And then he starts adding the date. So that, if you're wondering where they're coming up with these numbers, that's certainly how they did it. And so in verse 11, let's just bring this back to the scripture as we're studying this. It says, and Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. And so we can pretty well determine how old Shem was when he had Arphaxad, and we can backdate where the flood was. And then in verse 12, and Arphaxad lived 35 years and begat Salah. So, and that's really young. But so when Arphaxad was 35 years old, he begat Salah. So we had 35 years to that. And we're going backwards, of course, because we're BC, and that's 2248, which means Eber would have been born in 2218. Peleg, 2184, Ru, 2154, Serug, 2122, Nahor, this is the first one, would have been born in 2092, and then Terah would have been in 2063. Now, up until this point, all of these people live in Ur, or in the surrounding areas of Ur. They live in the kingdom of Babylon under the Nimrods. And in fact, it is understood by history that Terah actually was in the royal court of Nimrod, could have been a chief advisor to Nimrod because of his royalty and such as that. So Abraham was actually Chaldean royalty whenever he left Ur and went into the uncertainty of the promised land that God had granted him, and left all of the gods of Ur and began to embrace this invisible God that was speaking to him and making promises to him. And of course, this is the beginning of the relationship that Abraham has with God. And that is why God calls him the father of the faithful, because really everybody else around him were pagan. He hears this voice and this compelling desire to leave Ur and serve the one and true living God. And God said, you know, it took a lot of faith for Abram to do that, for him to just venture out into a place that he didn't even know where he was going. If you'd ask him, where are you going? I don't know. I'm just following this God that I have found. And I believe that he's the real God. And I haven't found an image of him, but I just believe he's the real God. And so he was certainly the father of the faithful, not because he never did anything wrong, but because he was willing to venture out in faith and establish a relationship with God when nobody else knew him. Nobody else knew God. And nobody else could be a good influence on him making that decision. But he just simply was so hungry for God, the real God, that he began to pursue after him and was willing to leave everything familiar, including a very comfortable royal lifestyle. Because Terah, of course, was in the house of Nimrod, and they would have lived very, very well. And Abram very well could have been raised around the palace in royalty. Because of the fact that his father was in the cabinet or the grand vizier or chief administrator or whatever he was, chief steward under one of the Nimrods. And of course, that's what they called their kings. Was before they changed it to Nebuchadnezzar, they called them the Nimrods. And so Abram, of course, would have been born somewhere about 1993, but that's BC, okay? And then that we can keep timing because in 1893, Isaac would have been born, Jacob in 1833, and Jacob would have went to Egypt in 1703, and we know that that is pretty close to right because there is in the hieroglyphics a recording of the famine that took place that caused Jacob to move to Egypt and try to find food for his family. So, you know, when you look at this, it's really amazing, and it does make the Bible come alive because now we're laying it aside history and we're beginning to see how it parallels with history and how correct the Bible is in a lot of its historical recordings. And then, of course, that means that Moses left Egypt around 1273, which is Exodus, the 12th chapter, and that would have been Exodus. So we're looking at these dates, and it kind of makes things a little, puts them in a setting for us, and we're beginning to understand and see, you know, what's happening here. So now, like I said, God is focusing down on Abraham. Abraham is going to be his focus, and Abraham is born in around 1993 BC. And when he goes to Egypt in when Jacob goes to Egypt in 1703, again we have the ratification of history that verifies that there was a famine in that area that occurred, which would be the reason that Jacob would have gone to Egypt. And of course, the Egyptian king of that day took him in and befriended him. And we'll read more about that as we continue to study. So if you keep all of this in mind as we're studying the next few chapters, just going back and referencing this that I'm sharing with you now, it'll help you to put into relativity everything that happened and how it happened, when it happened, and the things that were going on around it as it was happening. And we're just going to try to keep the Bible and history kind of side by side as we walk through the next few chapters and try our best to make the Word come alive to you. Thank you so much for watching us. We're doing all we can to make the Word come alive to you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Word Alive broadcast. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel. Once you've subscribed, make sure to click on the notification bell so that you'll be notified each time a new episode is released. If you'd like to support this ministry, you can do so by checking out our Patreon page and signing up for one of the provided monthly tiers. A link to our Patreon page can be found down in the description. God bless you, and we'll see you next time as we continue to make the Word come alive to you.